The Grand Hall of the Jari Dominion's High Council was a monument to conquest. Hewn from the core of a dying star, the walls shimmered with the ghostly glow of trapped stellar energy, casting long shadows that danced like specters across the chamber. Each seat in the circular amphitheater belonged to a ruler, an admiral, or a diplomat representing the most powerful civilizations in known space. The air was thick with the scent of burning incense, a tradition meant to symbolize the cleansing of weakness. Tonight, however, the scent carried an undercurrent of unease. High Warlord Vorin, his towering chitin-armored form framed by the golden banners of the Dominion, surveyed the assembly with cold, calculating eyes. His mandibles twitched, betraying the frustration simmering beneath his controlled exterior. When he finally spoke, his voice was a low growl, reverberating through the hall with the weight of authority. "We have been insulted." A ripple of murmurs spread through the gathered elites. Some leaned forward in their seats, eager for bloodshed, while others exchanged skeptical glances. Vorin's clawed hand clenched the edge of his obsidian podium. The deep grooves carved into its surface spoke of the countless times he had delivered pronouncements of war from this very place. "The Terrans," he continued, his tone laced with contempt, "have refused our demands. They have chosen defiance, and yet, in their arrogance, they send only one ship to face the might of the Dominion." Silence followed. Then, laughter, deep, guttural chuckles from the warlords of the Gethan clans, sharp hissing amusement from the Zeleri delegates. Even the normally reserved Vailari representatives exchanged knowing glances. The idea that humanity, a species that had only recently clawed its way into the interstellar stage, would dare to stand against the Dominion with a single vessel was absurd. Lord Cax, his emerald-scaled body draped in ceremonial war silks, flicked his forked tongue dismissively. "They have no armada. No allies willing to come to their aid. It is a gesture of desperation." His slitted eyes gleamed with amusement. "Or a pathetic bluff." Across the hall, a different sentiment flickered in the gaze of a Vailari diplomat. Unlike the Dominion or the warlike Zalari, the Vailari ascendancy prided itself on patience, on seeing the currents of history before they unfolded. Their representative, a pale-skinned being with silver-ringed eyes, tilted their head thoughtfully. "And yet," the Vailari murmured, voice barely above a whisper. "They sent it." The laughter died. No one spoke for a moment, but the weight of those words hung over the gathering like a thundercloud. The Terrans were reckless, unpredictable. They had a history of defying expectation, of turning the tide of battle through ingenuity rather than brute force. When the Skull Imperium sought to blockade Earth's trade routes, humanity had not sent war fleets. They had destabilized entire planetary economies through cyber warfare, collapsing the Skull government from within. When the Dominion's scouts first engaged human ships at the fringes of their empire, those ships, outgunned and outnumbered, had detonated entire moons to alter gravity wells, reducing the battlefield to chaos only they had prepared for. Now, they had sent one ship. The hall was no longer filled with smug amusement. A shadow of doubt slithered into the minds of those present, though none dared voice it. Vorin's mandibles clicked in irritation. He knew what they were thinking. He had seen the reports, the classified intelligence that suggested humanity did not fight on conventional terms, but he would not allow fear to take root here. "They will be annihilated before the next cycle is complete," he declared, his voice an iron promise. "Their ship will be reduced to debris. Their defiance will be their undoing." His piercing gaze swept over the assembled leaders. "And when we erase them from the stars, the galaxy will know, once and for all, that the Dominion does not tolerate defiance." The murmurs returned, this time in agreement. The momentary hesitation dissolved beneath the force of Vorin's conviction. Across the chamber, the Vailari diplomat remained still, watching, listening. They alone knew that the future had already changed. The void of space stretched endlessly, an abyss of silent darkness broken only by the cold, distant shimmer of stars. In this vast emptiness, the Jari Dominion's fleet loomed like an armada of ancient gods, Massive, obsidian warships bristling with enough firepower to turn entire planets into smoldering husks. Their formation was impeccable, a testament to centuries of military discipline. Every vessel, from the Leviathan-class dreadnoughts to the smaller, faster interceptors, held position with machine-like precision, their weapons locked onto the single anomaly that had dared to enter their dominion. A lone ship. It emerged from faster-than-light, travel in a flicker of distorted light, warping the very fabric of space as it decelerated into real-time existence. The Erebus was unlike any vessel the Dominion had encountered before. Its hull, dark as the void itself, seemed to drink in the starlight rather than reflect it. Its design was sleek, almost predatory, more akin to a living thing than a construct of metal and circuitry. It bore no ostentatious insignias, no war, banners proclaiming dominance, only the faint, almost imperceptible etching of its designation along the side. UTS Erebus. From the bridge of his flagship, High Warlord Vorin watched the human vessel drift into position. His mandibles tightened as he observed the sensor readouts. It was smaller than expected, barely half the size of a Dominion battleship. Its energy output was irregular, as though it lacked a traditional reactor core. There were no visible weapon systems, no indication of reinforcement fleets waiting. In the shadows, it was alone. A flicker of amusement danced in Voran's cold eyes. So the humans had truly sent a single ship to challenge the might of the Dominion. Arrogance, desperation, or madness, it did not matter. The outcome would be the same. The bridge of Voran's dreadnought was a cathedral of war, lined with towering, hollow displays depicting the unfolding scene. Around him, officers and tacticians monitored every fluctuation of energy, every minuscule shift in the fabric of space. The tension in the room was palpable, though none dared speak their concerns aloud. They had all seen the reports, the rumors whispered through the intelligence networks, stories of human unpredictability, of wars won not through brute strength, but through impossible strategies and terrifyingly adaptive technology. But now, they would see the truth with their own eyes. Vorin activated the communication link. A ripple of static echoed through the command deck before resolving into an open channel. The Erebus did not respond immediately. It merely floated in the abyss, a phantom against the backdrop of the Dominion's armada. Then, at last, a voice came through. High Warlord Vorin of the Jari Dominion, came the calm, measured tone of Captain Elias Kale. You have trespassed upon human territory. State your purpose. A sharp chittering sound, the Jari equivalent of laughter, rippled through the command deck. Vorin allowed himself a smirk. The sheer absurdity of the statement was almost impressive. Terran, Vorin rumbled, his voice rich with amusement. You are alone. Your species is alone. You have no reinforcements, no fleet, no allies willing to fight alongside you. And yet, you stand here, pretending that this— he gestured toward the lone ship on the holo display— is a deterrent. Silence, then a soft chuckle. Not nervous, not fearful, confident. A deterrent? Kyle mused. No, Warlord, you misunderstand. This isn't a deterrent. A pause. This is a demonstration. The words sent an involuntary ripple of unease through the Dominion officers. Vorin felt it too, though he buried it beneath his ever-present arrogance. He studied the human ship once more. It was still motionless, still utterly outmatched. And yet, something in the captain's voice unsettled him. Vorin dismissed the thought with a wave of his hand. Enough, he growled. You will power. Down your vessel and surrender. Refuse, and you will be erased from existence. The Erebus remained unmoving. Then, Kale's voice returned, this time edged with something far sharper than before. Then fire, Warlord. Let's see what happens. For the first time in his long, victorious career, Vorin hesitated. The silence that followed was unnatural. A void, deeper than space itself, seemed to stretch between the two forces. One a monolithic fleet of war, the other a solitary enigma wrapped in shadow. In every battle before, Vorin had witnessed surrender, desperation, or the reckless bravado of dying warriors who clung to a final hopeless stand. But this was different. The human's words carried no fear, no pleading, no false arrogance, only certainty. Vorin's mandibles flexed in irritation. Certainty from a lesser species was dangerous. His gaze flicked across the holodisplay, taking in the Erebus once more. It hung there in the void, deceptively inert, its hull seeming to absorb all light, a phantom against the black. It radiated no traditional energy signatures, no visible weapon systems, no defensive shielding detectable by Dominion scanners. Yet it did not move, did not adjust its positioning, as though it had no need to, as though it were already exactly where it needed to be. The command deck of the Dominion dreadnought was a symphony of controlled efficiency. Tactical officers monitored power fluctuations, analyzed threat probabilities, and projected likely countermeasures. The results were clear. The Erebus was a single vessel, inferior in firepower and mass. Statistically, its odds of survival were negligible. Voron's officers were already anticipating a swift execution. And yet, the longer Voron stared at the human ship, the less certain he became. High Warlord, one of his advisors murmured cautiously. Their refusal to surrender does not alter the outcome. We outgun them 1,000 to 1. Voron exhaled slowly, an imitation of the Terran gesture he had observed in past conflicts. They always breathed deeply before making critical decisions, as if drawing in something unseen before striking. He would grant them this final gesture, before ending them. All ships, Voron commanded, voice steady, absolute. Open fire. The void ignited. Lances of crimson energy surged forward, the might of an empire condensed into waves of destruction that burned through the darkness. The first volley alone contained enough firepower to reduce a capital world to ruin. Swarms of high-velocity projectiles followed, kinetic rounds capable of puncturing planetary crusts. The Dominion fleet did not waste time testing defenses. They sought to erase the Erebus in a single, overwhelming strike. But as the barrage closed in, the human vessel did something impossible. It did not evade. It did not deploy countermeasures. It did not even raise shields. At least, not in the way the Dominion understood them. The space around the Erebus rippled, the very fabric of reality bending, distorting. The incoming fire did not strike its hull. Instead, it vanished, twisted, into nothingness, as if space itself refused to allow the impact. Energy beams collapsed inward, their destructive force swallowed whole. The kinetic rounds curved away, deflected at impossible angles, sent spiraling harmlessly into the abyss. Gasps echoed through the Dominion warships as the impossible unfolded before their eyes. Voron's claws gripped the edge of his command throne. No shields, no counterfire. Just the utter nullification of the very laws of physics his species had spent millennia mastering. He turned sharply to his science officer, a veteran of countless campaigns. What was that? The officer's crest flared, a Jari sign of confusion and barely concealed fear. His mandibles twitched as he examined the sensor data. The human ship did not block our weapons, he said, voice uncertain. It redefined their trajectory within a localized gravitational field. Voron's mind raced. Gravity manipulation was not unheard of. The Dominion had developed gravity wells for planetary sieges, artificial singularities to disable enemy ships, but nothing in recorded history had demonstrated such precise, absolute control. This was not technology. This was something else. The communication link reactivated. Captain Kale's voice was calm, almost amused. Is that it? Every officer in the Dominion fleet felt it then. The slow, creeping sensation of doubt. They had unleashed their might. The force that had broken empires, crushed rebellions, reshaped the balance of power in the galaxy. And yet, against a single Terran vessel, it had amounted to nothing. Voron's throat rumbled in frustration. He would not allow hesitation to take root. He had seen human trickery before, knew their species relied on deception. This was no different, all. Forward attack squadrons, he barked, forcing steel into his voice. Engage at close range. Boarding teams, prepare for assault. I want that ship cracked open. He cut the transmission. His eyes locked on the Erebus. Whatever trick the humans had used to defy their first strike, it would not save them now, or so he told himself. The command deck of the Dominion flagship pulsed with tension. Voron had seen countless battles unfold from this very position, had ordered the destruction of entire worlds without hesitation. Yet as he watched his warships surge forward toward the Erebus, something unspoken coiled deep in his mind. A warning, ancient and primal, that something was terribly, impossibly wrong. His fleet moved like a well-oiled machine, squadrons of attack ships breaking formation and accelerating toward the lone Terran vessel. They were hunters descending upon a wounded animal, expecting an effortless kill. Plasma turrets ignited in synchronized bursts, and railguns fired rounds dense enough to punch through the crust of a moon. The boarding ships followed behind, sleek and armored, their hulls gleaming in the distant light of a nearby star. Their mission was simple: attach, breach, and seize control. The Dominion had subjugated species this way for centuries. It was routine. It was inevitable. Then, the Erebus moved. There was no engine flare, no warning of thruster ignition. It simply ceased to be in one place and reappeared in another, as if space itself had surrendered to its will. One of the Dominion frigates, unprepared for such movement, adjusted too late. It clipped the void where the human ship had been and spun wildly off course, colliding with one of its own allies in a sudden, violent explosion. The Dominion attack ships, though disciplined, hesitated for a fraction of a second. That was all. The Erebus needed. It unfolded. There was no other way to describe it. The ship's matte black surface seemed to shift, breaking apart in ways that should not have been possible. Geometric panels of interlocking material expanded, realigning into patterns that defied conventional spacecraft design. It was as if the ship was no longer bound by the constraints of a physical vessel, but was something else entirely. Something designed not for space travel, but for something far greater, far deeper. Then, reality itself cracked. A pulse emanated. From the Erebus, not light, not energy, but something older, something more fundamental. The nearest Dominion attack ships, already within striking range, twisted in on themselves, their hulls warping like liquid before vanishing into thin air. Not destroyed, not vaporized, simply erased. The warlord's officers recoiled, their expressions frozen between terror and disbelief. No weapon in the known galaxy could do what they had just witnessed. The Dominion had conquered civilizations with planet-cracking bombs, with weapons that could strip entire atmospheres away. But nothing had ever made ships cease to exist. Vorin forced his voice to remain steady. Tactical. What did they just do? The officer monitoring the battle looked pale, his usual confident posture hunched over the console like he could physically distance himself from what was happening. His fingers danced over the hollow display, searching for something, anything, that made sense. We don't know, High Warlord, the officer admitted. Our sensors detected no conventional energy discharge, no exotic radiation signatures. It's as if... He hesitated, the words catching in his throat. It's as if those ships never existed. Vorin clenched his jaw, the ridges along his skull tightening. That's impossible. Yet the evidence was undeniable. The Dominion, ships that had been there moments ago, were now gone, erased from all records as if they had never been constructed, as if their crews had never drawn breath. He forced his focus back to the battlefield. The Erebus had not fired a single visible weapon. It had not deployed fighters, nor launched missiles, nor activated anything that could be classified as an offensive system. It had merely shifted its structure, released that pulse, and rewritten the rules of existence. The remaining Dominion ships hesitated, their formations wavering. Vorin knew that hesitation was death in battle. He had broken enemies before simply by forcing them to doubt themselves. And now, for the first time in his life, he felt the cold grip of that same doubt creeping into his own mind. Then, the human ship spoke. Not through traditional communications, not through radio waves or tight beam transmissions. No, the words came directly into his mind, into the minds of every living thing aboard the Dominion fleet. You were warned. It was not a voice. It was an inevitability. It was the whisper of a collapsing star, the final breath of a dying god. It was not anger, nor was it cruelty. It was the cold, unshakable certainty of something that did not consider itself superior, but rather beyond. Aboard every ship in the Dominion fleet, chaos erupted. The most hardened warriors clutched their heads as if trying to wrench the voice from their minds. Some fell to their knees, their bodies convulsing. The cybernetically augmented tacticians, designed to interface with starship AIs, screamed as their implants surged with incomprehensible data, their minds flooded with information they were never meant to process. And then, the Erebus moved again. This time, Vareen understood that he was not witnessing propulsion. He was witnessing an object that did not abide by the same laws of time and space that the rest of the universe followed. The human vessel phased through the battlefield, untouched by physical limitations, appearing and reappearing as if choosing which moments of reality to exist within. It weaved through the chaos it had created, methodical, unstoppable. It was not evading fire. It was bypassing the concept of attack entirely. The Dominion fleet, an armada that had laid waste to empires, was unraveling. Vorin forced himself to his feet, gripping the armrests of his command, thrown until his claws threatened to crack the metal. He was a warlord of the Dominion. He had faced down planetary rebellions, led purges that reshaped the galactic balance of power. He would not bow to fear. His voice thundered through the bridge. "Full retreat is forbidden. All ships fire at will. If this thing defies logic, then we will reduce it to nothing through sheer force." His fleet obeyed. The warships that remained launched everything they had: plasma lances, kinetic slugs, nuclear payloads, antimatter torpedoes. The void itself became an inferno, the concentrated firepower of a civilization distilled into a single moment of desperate, overwhelming force. If the human ship could warp physics, then they would simply erase the space it occupied. For the first time, the Erebus responded. The space around the human vessel did not merely ripple this time. It fractured. A rift, jagged and vast, split, the fabric of reality apart like torn silk. For an instant, Vorin saw something beyond the rift, something that his mind rejected before it could fully comprehend. Not a void, not darkness, a presence. The Dominion fleet's weapons never reached their target. Instead, everything stopped. The battle, the war, the very concept of their struggle ceased to be, and then, the universe reasserted itself. The Erebus remained untouched. The Dominion ships, however, were changed. They were still there, but their weapon systems were inactive. Their engines were offline. Their power cores, though intact, had gone silent. The fleet was adrift, helpless in the abyss. Vorin's breath came in short, furious gasps. He knew what had happened. The Erebus had not destroyed them. It had simply removed their ability to be a threat. It had decided they were no longer relevant, and that, more than anything, filled him with a fear he had never known. Vorin's breath was slow and measured, but his mind was a storm. Every instinct, every lesson drilled into him from his earliest days as a hatchling, told him that this was not a battle anymore. It had never been. Battles were fought between forces that acknowledged the possibility of defeat. But the Erebus did not fight. It did not retaliate. It merely acted. And the Dominion's might had crumbled beneath the weight of a force it could neither comprehend nor resist. His warships hung dead in the void, their power stripped away as if the very concept of aggression had been rewritten. His fleet, once a roaring inferno of destruction, was now silent. The bridge of the Dominion flagship was just as frozen. His officers sat at their stations in stunned silence, their weapons useless, their training meaningless in the face of what they had witnessed. Even those who had moments ago screamed in agony as the human presence invaded their minds were now motionless, too drained, too hollow to react. A whisper of movement stirred through the command deck as one of his senior officers, Commander Zovak, finally spoke, his voice raw, his crest lowered in submission. "Warlord, what are your orders?" Orders. The word felt empty, useless. What orders could he give? There was no path to victory, no retreat, no surrender, no negotiation. The human ship had rendered them inert, and yet it had not destroyed them. It had not even acknowledged them as an enemy worthy of extermination. The Dominion was an empire that had crushed civilizations, reshaped the fates of entire species, and yet now it stood powerless against the will of a single vessel. Vorin clenched his jaw, stepping forward. If there was one thing he knew, one thing that had defined his entire existence, it was this: power was nothing without will, and his will had not been broken. Not yet. He turned toward the central communications panel and opened a direct channel to the Erebus. A single thread of static filled the air before it cleared, and the voice of Captain Kale returned, calm as ever, untouched by the gravity of what had just transpired. "You're still standing," Kale mused, his tone carrying the barest hint of curiosity. "That's unusual." Vorine's mandibles tightened. His pride burned at the idea that the human was amused by this. "You could have annihilated us," he growled. "Yet you did not. Why?" A pause. Then Kale spoke again, and his words carried a weight that chilled Vorine's very bones. "Because it was never a battle." The words struck harder than any weapon. A battle required two forces in conflict. A battle had winners and losers. But what had occurred here was not war. It was a demonstration. A lesson. The Dominion fleet had never been seen as an enemy. It had been seen as an observer, a force too insignificant to be worth the effort of destruction. Vorine's claws curled into fists. "We are the Dominion," he hissed. "Our empire has ruled for millennia. We have conquered species who thought themselves gods. And you expect me to believe that we are beneath you?" For the first time, Kale's voice carried a sliver of something different. Pity. "You mistake power for dominance. You mistake destruction for supremacy, and you mistake survival for significance." Vorine's heart pounded in his chest. He had spent his life carving a path through the stars, ensuring that the Dominion's name was spoken in whispers of fear and reverence. He had thought the humans weak, primitive, an upstart species that had risen too quickly and would fall just as fast. He had never considered the possibility that they were something else entirely. He forced himself to stand taller. "Then tell me, Kyle of Terra, what are you?" The silence that followed was heavier than the void itself. And then Kale answered, "We are what comes after." A pulse rippled through the void, a slow, deliberate shift in space-time. The Erebus began to move, but not as ships moved. It did not accelerate. It did not ignite its engines. It simply left. One moment it was there, the next it was gone, as if it had never been. As if it had simply ceased to exist within this reality. And Vorrin, warlord of the Dominion, the architect of countless wars, was left staring at the empty void where the human ship had been. Left with nothing but the knowledge that for all his victories, for all his empire's might, they had never truly understood the meaning of power, and they never would. The Dominion fleet drifted in absolute silence, the vast warships once bristling with destructive power now powerless in the abyss. A stillness had settled over them, not just within their deadened systems, but within the minds of every warrior, every officer, every being who had once believed themselves invincible. Vorin remained in his command throne, unmoving, staring into the void where the Erebus had disappeared. No wreckage, no debris, no trail of energy or disturbance in the fabric of space. It had simply chosen to no longer exist within their reality. His mind struggled against the weight of what had transpired. Not since the earliest days of the Dominion's conquests had they encountered something they could not dominate. Something that did not bow to the raw force of their empire. But this was beyond defiance. The humans had not resisted. They had demonstrated. It was as if they had stood before a storm, been warned not to step further, and, in their arrogance, had walked into its path, and the storm had simply erased the concept of their power. A quiet tremor ran through his limbs as he inhaled slowly. There was no shame in fear. Fear was an instinct, a survival tool. But this was not a fear of battle, nor a fear of defeat. It was something deeper, something existential. He had seen death. He had watched species fall before his armies, heard the desperate cries of the conquered as their worlds were broken beneath the Dominion's heel. He understood war, its cruelty, its purpose. But the Erebus had not fought. It had made a decision to spare them. That, more than anything, was what unsettled him. The idea that the humans had chosen to let them live, that they had looked upon the Dominion, upon its vast empire, its fleets, its warriors, and deemed them irrelevant. The bridge remained eerily quiet. His officers, the finest tacticians, The most ruthless commanders of his forces sat motionless at their stations, staring at their lifeless consoles. The crew had not spoken since the humans' final words. They were warriors, conquerors, trained from birth to believe in the absolute supremacy of the Dominion. And yet now, they sat like husks, their belief system fractured. Jovac finally broke the silence, his voice low, hesitant. "High Warlord, what do we tell them?" Vorin turned his gaze toward his second-in-command, his features unreadable. "They will be expecting orders," Jovac continued. "The fleet, the Empire, they will demand to know what happened here." His mandibles twitched, betraying the conflict in his mind. "Do we tell them we were defeated?" Vorin's claws scraped against the armrest of his throne, the metal, groaning under his grip. Defeat was a concept he understood. It was something that could be avenged, corrected through strategy, through force. But this was not defeat. This was revelation. He exhaled slowly. No. The word was empty, hollow, but final. Jovac frowned. "Then, what do we say?" Vorin's eyes darkened, his mind racing through possibilities. The Dominion thrived on its image of absolute strength. It ruled because it was feared, because it had never encountered a force greater than itself. If the truth of what had happened here reached the High Council, it would shake the very foundation of their rule. Fear would turn inward. Doubt would spread like rot. And if word spread beyond their borders, if their enemies learned that the Dominion was not the ultimate power in the galaxy, it would invite rebellion, chaos. The Empire would collapse under the weight of its own deception. He stood slowly, his posture regaining its rigid authority. "We say nothing." Jovac's head snapped up in disbelief. "Nothing?" Vorin turned to face the vast window of the command bridge, gazing into the endless void. "No records of this battle will exist. No reports will be made. No transmissions will leave this sector." His voice was calm, but beneath it lay something sharper, something raw. "What happened here will be buried, forgotten." Jovac hesitated, his hands gripping the edges of his station. "And if the High Council demands an explanation?" Vorin's jaw tightened. "Then we tell them we crushed a minor resistance, a meaningless skirmish. A battle not even worth mentioning. It was a lie, a desperate, fragile lie. But it was the only path forward. The Dominion could not afford to acknowledge the truth. To do so would be to accept that there were forces in this universe beyond their control. And the moment their people realized that their Dominion was not absolute, that the walls of their empire could be breached, it would all come crumbling down. Jovac's gaze lingered on his warlord for a long moment, before he finally gave a slow nod, his expression unreadable. "Understood." One by one, the bridge officers straightened, their silence heavy with unspoken agreement. The truth would die here, among them. It had to. Vorin turned away from them, his gaze still locked on the empty void. Because deep down, beneath the layers of his pride, beneath the weight of his title, he knew the truth would not stay buried forever, because the humans had let them live. And one day, the Dominion would have to face what that truly meant. The Dominion fleet limped away from the battlefield, their warships intact but hollowed by something far worse than destruction. The vast armada that had once darkened the stars now moved in near silence, their comm channels empty, their warriors subdued. There were no victory cries, no chants of conquest. Only the quiet hum of deadened engines as they made their way back, toward Dominion space, carrying with them a secret that would never be spoken. Vorin sat alone in his private chamber, his claws resting against the smooth, cold metal of his desk. His reflection stared back at him from the polished surface. But it was not the warlord he remembered. He had spent his life forging his path through war, believing in the absolute rule of strength. He had stood at the precipice of countless battles, had looked into the eyes of enemies and seen only fear. But now, when he closed his own eyes, all he saw was the empty void where the Erebus had vanished. He reached out, fingers hovering over the interface of his personal console. A single command would send a transmission directly to the High Council. A carefully crafted report of a minor skirmish. A routine engagement with no significant consequences. A fabricated truth that would preserve the illusion of Dominion supremacy. He knew he had no choice. The Empire demanded strength, and the illusion of power was as important as power itself. But deep in his core, he understood the reality. The Dominion had not simply encountered a superior enemy. It had glimpsed something beyond its comprehension. A force that did not abide by the rules of war. A species that did not seek conquest, did not hunger for destruction, but had the capability to erase an empire if it so desired. Humanity had rewritten the very nature of power in a single engagement. A quiet chime interrupted his thoughts. The transmission link flickered, displaying an incoming message. Not from the High Council, not from his commanders, from an unknown source. Voreen hesitated, then activated the link. A single line of text appeared on the screen, written in the common galactic dialect. You were given a choice. Choose wisely. A cold dread settled in his chest. There was no signature, no trace of an origin. Just those 6 words. His claws curled into fists as he sat back in his chair, exhaling slowly. He had known, even in the moment it happened, that the humans had allowed them to leave. But this message, it was a warning, a reminder. He closed the transmission, erasing any record of it. The report to the High Council would be sent within the hour. The battle would be forgotten. The Dominion would move forward, as it always had. And yet, Vorin knew with an unshakable certainty that humanity had not simply disappeared into the void. They were watching, waiting. And if the Dominion ever made the wrong choice, the next time, there would be no warning, no mercy, just silence.